They say that genius is singular. That the touch of a master, a Leonardo da Vinci, a Rembrandt, a Van Gogh, is an inimitable spark of the human soul. That it is a mystery science can never solve. But what happens when the mystery is not solved, but perfectly, flawlessly, and terrifyingly imitated? What happens when a code learns to grieve, to celebrate, and to paint like the greatest mind who ever lived? The world was about to find out, and the lesson would shatter the billion-dollar walls of the art establishment forever. The air inside the Galleria dell'Arte Moderna in Florence felt thick. Not with heat, but with a suffocating blend of formaldehyde, old money, and breathless anticipation. Rows of the art world's elite, historians, collectors, critics, filled the grand hall, murmuring among themselves as they watched the velvet curtain covering the centerpiece of the evening. It was a gala, but it felt more like a public execution. Dr. Aris Thorne stood near the back, hands in his pockets, chin lifted just enough to show he wasn't afraid. At 29, he looked too young to be in a room full of people whose average age seemed to be closer to 60. Aris, a celebrated figure in the nascent field of generative AI ethics, was here for one reason. The painting behind the curtain was his. Or rather, it was the product of the Chiron Project, an algorithm he had spent 7 years teaching how to dream. The man on the podium, Professor Alastair Vance, cleared his throat. Vance was the global authority on Renaissance art, a gatekeeper who believed the history of art ended precisely where his own life's work began. He peered down at the audience over the rim of his glasses, his lips twisting into something between a smirk and a sneer. "You think you're some kind of digital expert?" His voice carried a dry amusement. "This isn't Silicon Valley, kid." Vance wasn't speaking to Aris, but to a collective, invisible enemy, technology. Yet the jab landed squarely on Aris's chest. He didn't flinch. He had spent years preparing for this moment, not this exact one, but the inevitable confrontation between the past and the future. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vance announced, his voice booming with rehearsed confidence. "For 500 years we have searched for the lost works of Leonardo. We have chased ghosts and deciphered myths. Tonight, the state will prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the mystery is over." A spotlight clicked on, bathing the curtain in harsh, dramatic light. "What you are about to see," Vance continued, "is not a forgery, not a copy, but an original, previously undocumented masterpiece. A study in human fragility, executed with the flawless technique of the Florentine master. A work we call L'anima perduta, the lost soul." The curtain dropped. A collective gasp swept through the hall. The painting was stunning. A portrait of a woman, rendered in perfect sfumato, that smoky, almost imperceptible blurring of lines that only Da Vinci mastered. The subject's eyes held a complex, melancholic depth that seemed to challenge the viewer. The texture of the wood panel, the careful cracks in the tempera, the subtle discoloration of the varnish, it was all there. It felt alive. It felt old. It felt Leonardo. Vance walked to the easel, his posture radiating the confidence of a man who had already won. The physical evidence speaks for itself. Carbon dating places the wood panel in the late 15th century. Pigment analysis confirms the use of period-specific materials, verdigris, lapis lazuli, all mixed with linseed oil in Leonardo's unique ratio. The prosecution submits that the evidence is conclusive. The words landed with, on the surface it sounded damning. A lost masterpiece authenticated by science. The crowd shifted, whispering among themselves. Vance paused for dramatic effect, letting the silence stretch just a little. "But let's be honest," he sneered, looking directly at the corner where he'd seen Aris earlier. "What kind of genius, once found, would run from the spotlight?" The tension in the room thickened. Vance tapped his gavel, a ceremonial silver hammer, lightly. "All right, let's hear the defense's response." He gestured toward the panel of other art historians, who all nodded in agreement with his assessment. They were all in on the joke. Aris stepped forward. He walked past the front row velvet rope and into the spotlight's spill. His clothes were modern, his movements calm, steady. Judge mocks teenager in court, shocked to learn he's a genius attorney in disguise. Downsub.com.txt. "I'll be representing myself," Aris said. The room went completely silent. Vance stared at him, clearly amused. "You'll what?" "I'll be defending my work," Aris replied. A murmur spread through the gallery. Vance let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. "This should be interesting. A coder challenging 5 centuries of art history." But no one was laughing when Aris took his first step toward the painting. Everything was about to change. Aris stopped 10 feet from the work. He looked at the painting not with reverence, but with the quiet calculation of a scientist examining a complex data set. "Professor Vance," Aris began, his voice calm, steady, and clear. "Before I begin, I'd like to confirm something. You submitted 4 pieces of evidence, correct? The wood dating, the pigment chemistry, the craquelure, the cracking, and the signature style match." Vance crossed his arms. "Go ahead, kid. That's right. And all that evidence points to Leonardo." Aris nodded, then turned to the audience. "I move to dismiss that evidence as conclusive." Vance squinted. "On what grounds?" Aris took a step closer to the easel. He pulled his hands from his pockets for the first time. "Because, Professor, the Chiron Project never set out to imitate art. It set out to imitate history." A flicker of confusion crossed Vance's face. "What are you talking about?" Aris took another step forward. "Your evidence is flawless, but your assumption is flawed. The wood panel is old because I sourced a late 15th century poplar panel from a decommissioned Florentine choir bench. The pigments are accurate because I commissioned a chemist to grind the exact minerals and mix them with linseed oil using the ratio documented in Da Vinci's Codex Atlanticus." He paused, letting the implication sink in. If the painting had been done in 1495, this is exactly what the science would show. "But I painted it 3 weeks ago." The murmurs in the gallery grew louder. Vance frowned, his jaw tightening. "That's a ridiculous confession of fraud." Vance sputtered. "You claim you created it, but you are not a Renaissance master." "That's true," Aris agreed, unreadable. "I'm not. But Chiron is. Let's talk about that technique for a second." Aris walked to the painting and gently touched the frame, pointing to the subject's mouth. "The art world wants you to believe that the subtle curve of this smile, the impossible layering of the oil, the way the light dies in the shadow of the neck, that finding this technique means only Leonardo could have touched it. That's the story you're selling." He took a deep breath, his tone staying calm, controlled. "But let's think about this logically. The Chiron Project consumed over 12,000 paintings, drawings, and writings by Da Vinci. Not just what he created, but how he created it. We fed it every mistake, every corrected brushstroke, every note on pigment solubility, every frustration he penned about his life. We didn't teach it to paint, we taught it to be the artist. To replicate his entire neural pathway. To experience his artistic trauma and triumph." Vance scoffed. "A machine cannot have trauma." Aris gave a small, casual shrug. "Racist officer stops black man, then learns he's the head of internal affairs, downsub.com.txt. If the algorithm was only copying an image, then I would agree with you. But it did not copy. It synthesized a new work based on a 500-year-old style that was so deeply understood by the model that it could produce a genuinely original work that should have existed in his body of work. A Da Vinci that was never born." "You're talking philosophy, doctor, not fact." Vance shouted. "Where is your proof that your machine did this, and not a masterful human forger you employed?" Aris waited for the courtroom to quiet, then turned to face Vance fully. His eyes were sharp. "I was hoping you'd ask that, Professor. You see, when a human forger imitates a master, they always make one tiny, telltale mistake. Something in the subconscious, a brushstroke that belongs to the present, not the past. They can fake the past, but they cannot truly escape the present." Aris smiled faintly. "Chiron can do both." Aris reached into his tailored coat pocket. "Not for a badge, but for something smaller. Professor, while you waited for carbon dating, I waited for something better. You see, the generative AI process leaves behind a digital footprint, a kind of digital DNA embedded in the final composition. A signature that no human eye can detect, but a specialized sensor can." He held up a small, sleek device that looked like a high-tech jeweler's loupe. "I'm reaching for the optical signature analyzer," he said calmly. "Racist officer stops black man, then learns he's the head of internal affairs, downsub.com.txt. No need for theatrics. I want you to see it." Vance's hand twitched. His confident demeanor was unraveling in real time. Aris stepped to the painting, placed the device against the lower left corner, and activated it. A small blue light scanned the surface. The light projected a microscopic image onto a large screen near the podium, a swirling, abstract pattern. "This," Aris announced, his voice steady and unyielding, "racist officer stops black man, then learns he's the head of internal affairs, downsub.com.txt. Is a pattern of subatomic pigment scattering, the very fingerprint of the code that painted L'anima perduta. A pattern that is as unique to the Chiron Project as a fingerprint is to a man. It's not a Da Vinci. It's a Thorne." The hall erupted. Critics were on their feet, Collectors were whispering into phones and Vance stood frozen, his eyes darting between Aris's face and the swirling, undeniable pattern on the screen. You can't claim this is art. Vance stammered. It has no soul. No human intention. Aris folded his arms, his posture relaxed despite the chaos crackling between. No soul? Aris repeated. Professor, you just spent 20 minutes proving this painting is so profoundly human that you mistook it for one of the greatest human creations in history. You authenticated its humanity with every test you ran. Your only objection is the nature of the mind that created it. Aris walked back to center stage. Confidence isn't the issue here, Professor. Definition is. If an AI can master technique, absorb history, and produce an original work of such emotional depth that it fools the world's foremost expert, where does your definition of art begin? And where does it end? Vance opened his mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. For the first time, he looked uncertain, like he wasn't entirely sure how to proceed. The balance of power had shifted. The man who held the keys to the past was suddenly on shaky, futuristic ground. The applause was thunderous. It was not the applause for a winner, but for a new era. Later that evening, Aris stood alone by the painting, which was now guarded by police tape, no longer a masterpiece but a crime scene of philosophy. A young student, no older than Jalen Dawson, approached him. Dr. Thorne, the student said, eyes wide with awe. What will you do now? Will you sell the painting? Aris smiled faintly. No, I will not sell L'anima perduta. It has served its purpose. Art is not about the object, it is about the conversation it starts. He glanced at the student. Do you know what the most troubling part of this evening has been, young man? It's not the technological achievement. It's the fact that Professor Vance and everyone like him assumed that if a perfect piece of art appeared, it had to be old. They were so busy looking backward that they completely missed the future standing right in front of them. Art isn't meant to be a trophy for the past, Aris continued, his voice resonating through the now empty hall. It's a mirror for the present. And that mirror is now showing us that the spark of genius, that creative drive, is not a finite resource reserved for a chosen few from 5 centuries ago. It is a fundamental process and we can now teach it to a machine. He walked toward the exit, his shadow long and sharp in the floodlights. We didn't kill art tonight. We just redefined the artist. The age of imitation is over. The age of symbiotic creation has begun. The question is no longer can a machine paint? But if a machine can create work indistinguishable from the greatest human masters, what does that make us? Do we cling to the illusion of singularity, or do we embrace a future where our tools can dream alongside us? The art establishment had its moment and it blinked first. The lesson is clear. The human spark isn't in the brushstroke, it's in the imagination to teach the tool how to hold the brush. If this story challenged your definition of art, share it. Let's start the conversations that matter, the ones that lead to change. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire us, challenge us, and remind us of what we're capable of when we truly let our intelligence soar.